Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Homestead for a Living. We just had a big rain and I wanted to kind of have a little bit of fun, so we're just going to do a walk through our food forest, which is currently being established. And I really just wanted to take a moment to show the unconventional nature of our food forest, how we're going about it, and how, how little planning really goes into it. Of course, we do some basic planting the higher value things where there's plentiful water, looking where our sunlight is, and planting the trees that require more maintenance kind of in the area where we are going to be spending more time. But really everything kind of goes everywhere. What we did was earlier this spring we started our nursery, and it's underneath this big beautiful white oak tree right here. And we bought these plants wholesale, and by selling them we're kind of able to subsidize our food forest planting, because we sell maybe about half of them and then we are able to plant the other half. Particularly some of these will get mislabeled or unlabeled. We'll forget what variety they are of blueberry or something like that. And so then we can't sell them, we might as well plant them. So we're able to fill up the property essentially for free. So I wanna just walk through it and show how our annual production, our pastures, everything like that is completely interchangeable with our food forest. Everything on the property is a food forest because we want to introduce perennial production everywhere, and make this property increasingly more passive. So this first spot is probably the most formal, and it doesn't look it, but it's the most formal. Nothing really looks very formal on this property. But this is our driveway, and it's south facing. So we get a lot of sunlight right here. So what we did here was we planted, and this is the pathway to our driveway and our vehicles. So we planted the stuff that takes a little more maintenance, like apples. So we did lines of these apples. Here's an apple, here's an apple. We did a lot of Arkansas black and Liberty apples that tend to do well here. And these are generally guilds where we'll plant an apple, we'll plant other things like garlic, like comfrey, as well as annual plants that we want to come up. We'll leave a lot of native things in that are useful, like wild lettuce, which is a natural painkiller. We're letting that one go to seed, and we'll be saving the seeds. And things like strawberries as a ground cover, regular strawberries, alpine strawberries, herbs that will come back and go to seed, such as this oregano right here. You'll have to pardon the weediness. And behind those, we have our overstory trees. They're a little bit further south. So some of them are like this oak we saved. And by the way, oak is an edible tree. The acorn is perfectly edible. It was a staple in the American Indian diet. You just have to leach the acorn, either set it in a running stream of water for a few days, or boil it, dump the water out, boil it, dump the water out, do that a few times, and you have a perfectly edible, nearly complete protein source, and delicious, by the way. You can even make grain out of it, and breads. We have other overstories. We let some of the sumacs get really tall. We have black cherry over there. We'll talk a lot about black cherry, one of my favorite native plants, and very delicious and very edible. So that's what we did on this whole line, was we have tall trees, medium-sized trees, and then smaller shrubby type things in front of those trees, such as elderberry. Over here we actually have a much nicer specimen of an elderberry. We're just about ready to harvest. In this case, this elderberry is actually dwarfing the apple tree. It really shot up this year, but we'll knock that back down and take a bunch of cuttings from it this year and start a lot more elderberry plants, and it'll come roaring right back. Even the front of our house is a food forest. So as close as we could without damaging the foundation, we planted these pear trees, such as that one. There's a smaller one there. It got killed back a little bit during the winter. But those will be really fun when they grow up. They will flank that doorway and make an entrance where you walk underneath and between these two pear trees, and there's a whole line of them catching all of the water coming down this driveway, which stops and exits. And we planted these canna lilies as a shade and a privacy barrier for the windows. Really fun plant. The pollinators absolutely love it. The tubers and the leaf are edible. You can wrap food in that leaf. And our beans just love to climb it. You can see this vine climbing up it, and they actually will hold on to it. The stalk is really strong, and we get to put beans on it. Absolutely love canna lily. It's become one of my favorite plants unexpectedly. And as we're here in this zone 1, we also have a lot of herbs, because that's normally what you want to plant outside of your garden, out of your kitchen. This way we can walk outside every day and grab our tea herbs and our culinary herbs. So things like catnip, oregano, basil, thyme, rosemary. But throughout these, we're still adding more perennials. This is the only non-edible perennial probably find planted on the property. It's a Japanese maple. Bert Driver Nursery over in Smithville. Bert Driver gave that to us, so it was kind of a fun little addition to the property. I'm sure I'll find a use for it eventually. Right now it's doing some erosion control, so I guess that's a use. We also let a lot of things grow wild in here, such as perilla mint, things that are edible, herbs, and useful. comfrey absolutely everywhere. We plant guilds when we do our trees. We do the tree and then we do the comfrey. We can chop and drop those big giant leaves around the base of the tree, and that does our weeding for us. When we moved onto this site, it was about 15-year growth of scrubby trees, which was awesome because we got to pick and choose what we wanted to keep. And so one thing we kept a lot of was black cherry. And these black cherries did really well for us this year. They actually produce a little black berry with a big seed inside of it. It's tart like a pie cherry, and it's really fun. You just squish it up, pour some hot water on it, and then you have a syrup that you can make your wine or your brandies or your syrup, your milkshakes, whatever you want to make out of that black cherry juice you can do. And it's really easy. You get a ton off of these trees. The pollinators love them as well. They coppice nicely like that one, so great plant to identify, and if you live anywhere that grows black cherry, great plant to have around. Here we're entering into an annual garden spot. That's this big giant squash patch, tons and tons of squash up in there. But once again, it's interchangeable with the forest. These are existing trees we left in, and these squash are trellising up at no problem. That brings those squash and cucumbers and melons off of the ground, and beans, and keeps them away from the funguses and blights that tend to infect them when they're on the ground. Here's a squash climbing up an evergreen tree. It's really fun. And then we have our more formal garden infrastructure like this trellis with things like the birdhouse gourd, and beans, cucumbers, all sorts of things like that crawling up it. So hopefully you're getting the idea here, which is that there's no real delineation on our property between garden and food forest. We're working all these spots. Everything is getting annuals planted because we need food right now, but everything is getting perennials planted because we want to graduate this whole property to more passivity. We want to make it more hands-off. So our diet will change over time and become more perennial, more nut-based, more fruit-based, and focusing more on the perennial vegetables, things like asparagus, things like Jerusalem artichoke, stuff that comes back year after year. We'll still grow our carrots and tomatoes and regular stuff too. Just another example here on the front porch of the stuff we have trellising up this cattle panel. A lemon cucumber, which is pretty fun. So I'll go ahead and take you up top. But hopefully the point here that you're seeing is there's very little in terms of rules, and you really can just sit and puzzle it out with each plant you do. You know, how tall does this tree get? I know we have the 7 layers of food forest. That's taught in permaculture, but it's really less formal than that because, for example, I use sumac as a shrubby bush in many areas, but look at this one. Here it's an overstory tree. An apple could be an overstory tree. I've seen giant apples, or it could be a smaller tree. It could be a semi-dwarf. Same with mulberry. There's shrubby mulberries, there's tall mulberries. So if you go into a real forest, it's not in 7 layers, it's in indefinite layers, and it's more complex than that. The 7 layers thing just kind of helps make people understand, but really, just think, where is the sun? Tall stuff in the back, small stuff in the front. That's about as complex as a food forest needs to be. So up here we have our annual area. This is was a regular standard garden, but we're slowly planting out a privacy wall that's gonna be edible. We're stealing David the Good's idea for a death hedge. So on the outer perimeter, we're planting our useful trees. We've got plums and mulberry, trellising beans up the mailbox just for fun. But what we have in between these other crops, this is our commercial crop of Jerusalem artichoke, stretching all the way down the line. We'll be selling those tubers on hollowtopfarms.com this fall. But we're interplanting it with lots of tall mulberries, and then cedar and juniper trees, which are edible. You can do a lot with a cedar tree. Juniper berries can be used if you're making gin for some reason. But primarily it's an edible hedge, and we're letting the native blackberries stay here. And we're planting thorny raspberries and other thorny varieties. So what we're doing is we have a lot of traffic from that forest of deer into our property. So we're trying to make a hedge where they'll have stuff to munch on the outside, but it will deter them from penetrating onto the inside. And it will keep out animal intruders as well as human intruders and provide a privacy hedge. This is the busiest part of the property, so we really want more privacy up here. So that's why we're doing that. Evergreens and mulberries throughout this entire row. And going down this row, we're doing the same, but we're also keeping a lot of native stuff, such as this staghorn sumac. Sumac is one I'm a big proponent of. I absolutely love sumac trees. Those little berries, which are beautiful little red berries, not just beloved by pollinators. They're very tart and they have a pink lemonade taste. So you can make kind of a pink lemonade type drink, or you can make all the usual stuff, jams and jellies. Also, you can dry the berry and it's used as a spice in traditional Lebanese and Indian cooking. It's very tasty. We just did a duck and wild rice dish the other night with it. And in addition to the berries, when these leaves dry out, they are actually smokable, like tobacco. They have a very kind of fruity taste to them. There's no psychotropic effect that I can discern, but the Native Americans really enjoyed smoking them, and they do have a very pleasant taste if you're into that kind of thing. And also, it's a good forage plant. The goats absolutely love these. They eat the bark as well as the leaves. So it's a great plant for your silvopasture, but just know that those goats will destroy the tree. It copses nicely. Rabbits love this, chewing on the sticks. Everything loves it. So it's just a great tree all around. Super useful. It gets really tall, really short, but kind of stays like a sparse tree. It doesn't get gigantic. So on this outer edge of the property, we have our mulberries coming up. We've got pecans. We're doing a lot of tall trees and continuing that privacy barrier. We are being stalked by a wildcat. He's got a hurt leg that's healing up. And now we've come into our septic field, otherwise known to normal people as the backyard. It's just about the only thing that looks like a normal yard on this property. Although it's still pretty bushy and unmowed. I'm just gonna blame that on the saving it for pollinators, not because I didn't want to mow. And our food forest continues even here. We can't plant above the septic field, but just below it, at this forest line, we're gonna be planting useful plants. We're gonna be planting a lot more mulberries and things that are fodder plants for our animals, so that as food leaves the house down the septic system, those nutrients are absorbed by those trees, and then we lop off those branches and we feed them back to our animals. Thus bringing that cycle of nutrients back to the top of our property and starting it all over again, so we don't lose anything. Kind of closing the loop on this farm. So I hope that's kind of inspiring, or just maybe you just think that this property is chaotic and crazy. Either way is fine. But that's how we go about planting our food forest. We just kind of puzzle it out as we go. We do some planning, but it's rather informal, because you don't know what's going to work on a site until you try stuff. So don't be afraid to be pretty unconventional. We do all the normal food forest things, planting a lot of clover and nitrogen fixtures first and bare spots. But we also do a lot of unconventional stuff, a lot of leaving of existing plants that are valuable and useful, such as poke, which is a medicinal and edible plant when cooked properly. Very popular here in the hills of Tennessee. The old timers will tell you all about its health benefits. So that's our food forest. If you want to know how to plant a food forest real cheap, we cover that in our new book that we just finished with Billy from Permapastures Farm. It's called Scrapsteading, and it's up at scrapsteading.com. It'll be available August 14th, but if you go there sooner when this video comes out, you can just put your email in and we'll let you know when the book's ready to come out. And so I hope you all read that if you like it, and I hope you all plant food forests. In the meantime, everyone, stay safe, be well, and happy homesteading.